Hey guys, welcome to the Hypertrophy Hustle Show. So this week, this is a lovely conversation between Jack Thorburn and Lyndon Purcell. So we're sort of talking around the whole RIR versus training to failure thing. This conversation was largely inspired by Steve Hall or Revivestronger's conversation with Jordan Peters and Mike Israetel. So if you want some more preface for that, go and listen to that. That was another fantastic conversation. This is sort of a continuation of that, and also I think it tackles it from a different, unique perspective. You might see what I mean when we get into it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Go and check out Jack at Jack_Thorburn on Instagram, or Lyndon at hot and Dongerous on Instagram, I believe, or JPS Education, JPS_education. Thank you very much. Hey guys, welcome to the Hypertrophy Hustle Show. This week I'm speaking to Jack and Lyndon. So Jack is from the UK. He has his master's in strength and conditioning. He's also a very, very good natural bodybuilder. Jacked as fuck. You should see this dude when he's shredded. It's fucked. And then we have Lyndon. So Lyndon works at JPS Health and Fitness, obviously a fantastic education company and also a coaching company. Lyndon is also currently pursuing his master's in high performance sport. And yeah, today we're going to have a conversation sort of around training to failure and then sort of training intensity. Obviously, this is a conversation that has been had, I would say, quite a few times now. But I think these two individuals will have interesting points to say, and I think it'll be a really interesting discussion to facilitate because of what I've sort of seen of their points in the past. But should we just go ahead and from the beginning sort of outline both your guys' points and then sort of go from there? Lyndon, would you like to outline your general point first in terms of training to failure intensity, how you think we should manage intensity for training for... Should we base this primarily around hypertrophy?
Yeah, was that a question, or you're framing that for me? We should...
Yeah, I think we should base it primarily on hypertrophy.
Keep it hypertrophy, yeah.
Yep, sweet. Okay, so like before we get too far in, like intensity, what we're talking about is primarily the variable we talk about when we talk about how hard training is, quite fundamentally from the sports science perspective. We can be talking about intensity in regards to like percentage of 1RM, or we might be talking about intensity in regards to proximity to failure, both measures of, theoretically how difficult the training should be, or in just the more colloquial sense, how it's typically used in bodybuilding terminology, just in the gym. Like intensity might be like short rest periods, large amount of focus, like you're just going in, you're sweating, like you are getting after it. So before we even go any further than that, there's a broad range of what we're going to be talking about. So if we do just need to clarify what we're going to be talking about. If I make a specific case, pull me up and if it's not clear. So again, just to sort of lay some groundwork, most adaptations are thought to be intensity dependent, and the volume determines the magnitude of the adaptation, or at least that is, I guess, some of the sports science of old. And it's, again, sports science is constantly evolving, and we're learning more things every day, year, week, whatever. Hypertrophy doesn't seem to be intensity dependent to a degree, that, like in the sense that we can have an extremely broad range of percentage of 1RM that can be used to generate hypertrophy, but it is relatively intensity dependent when it comes to relative intensity. So proximity to failure. When it comes to generating hypertrophy, we need to be pretty close to failure. And I guess what today's discussion will focus on is how close to failure does it need to be beneficial, or does it need to be to failure? So I guess coming back to the question, which I shouldn't have minimized in chat so I can actually focus and not ramble too much. My view is based when it comes to hypertrophy, we need to activate high threshold motor units. That's important. We need to be pretty damn close to failure to do that. I get as we get closer and closer to failure, rep speed slows down. So the amount of tension that is placed on active or recruited fibers goes up due to the force velocity relationship. As the rep speed slows down, the tension goes up or the force goes up. So close to failure is important for activating high threshold motor units. And once we've done that, slower and slower reps also provide greater amounts of tension, all very beneficial in the cascade of generating hypertrophy adaptations. However, the issue I run into is it seems somewhat unclear how much more beneficial those last 1 or 2 reps are from failure, in my opinion. I think once we get pretty close to failure, our job is pretty much done, I guess. We've generated quite a good hypertrophic response, and I'm unsure whether the being taken to complete failure is net advantageous once we factor that in to the larger framework of with our recovery and demands of training, volume and intensity are somewhat inversely correlated. So if we're going to agree, and pull me up if there's no agreement here, if we're going to agree that when intensity goes up, volume as a byproduct must come down, I'm unsure whether it's driving home those final 1 or 2 reps, if that's going to come at the cost of, maybe more productive sets or volume in the future. I've rambled for long enough. We can pick up nuances from here, but go for it, Jack.
No, I think that was really well explained, especially the sort of points you got across at the end. So coming from sort of my perspective, I think when you were outlining the recruitment of high threshold motor units, the closer we get to failure, that would be my sort of main point. And you're looking at sort of the effective reps. So I think you're looking at anywhere from, I think it's about 4 to 5 reps away from that failure point that's deemed the effective reps. So those effective reps being the ones that are going to elicit the hypertrophic response. My main criticism of the sort of leaving the reps in reserve as to allow you to accrue more volume is that a lot of people don't know what true failure is. So if they were to be asked to leave 2 reps in the tank, as you said, maybe those last 2 would allow them to accrue more volume for the rest of the session. They're 2 reps in reserve purely because they don't know what true failure is, may turn out to be 4 reps in reserve. And if that is the case, they may not have even reached, they may be 1 effective rep in, or maybe not even reached that effective rep yet. So that set may have almost so I think before we start really delving into it, it's going to be very dependent on the person's sort of training age, and also their sort of training ability and their ability to take sets to true failure and know what true failure is in the first place. Also, I think one thing that's another fact you've got to take into account is sort of adherence as well. So I know me personally, I know other individuals as well. Even when I'm, say, like a week out from a show, even when I'm told to leave reps and stuff like that, I find it very hard to, purely from just an enjoyment factor. And also that's how I've always trained. And that's how I like to train. I think I wouldn't I would not have the same sort of drive and motivation and sort of looking forward to training if I knew I had to leave sort of 2 reps in the tank every set. So those are sort of 2 factors that I think are going to massively influence the sort of effectiveness of leaving reps in reserve. I'm not against it at all, but it has to be. It's very dependent on the individual and their ability to know what failure is. Basically, that's sort of my opening sort of standpoint.
Mm. And then in terms of that, Lyndon, did you have any responses there? Did you have any sort of, do you have different opinions there, or what's your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, for starters, I want to start from a place of agreement on all these things. Like, they are without a doubt 2 massive critiques against the RPE, RIR methodology. Ones that, I made notes of before, while I was preparing for this talk, I guess, and really just things about like, all right, like, these are obstacles, and if I fall in the camp that says, RPE is better, then I should have a logical explanation for why I don't think these are an issue. And obviously we're trying to balance trade-offs. Like, no methodology is going to be perfect. And I think, let's actually, go back to Jack's point. He made a very conservative estimate of how far people can be off true failure. There was I can't remember who did the study in particular.
Was it the leg press? Was it the leg press study?
Yeah. It's I think some of them were like more like a dozen reps.
Yeah, 12. It was 12 reps, I think. Yeah, 12 reps off. Yeah, I think it was. They stopped. I think it was about 8, and they ended up doing 20 to 25, something like that. I think.
There you go. Like, although we know, not to base any of our thinking on one study entirely, like, that is just one very big roadblock in the way of RPE. And like, one of the limitations you always run into with training studies is the population. Like, are they trained? Are they untrained? And like, quite fundamentally, if someone made a case for these individuals being trained, I wouldn't really hear it. Like,
I believe the population was trained, but they weren't well trained at all. I think it was a year max training. Yeah. So, yeah.
And there is and this is another one of those factors that we need to weave in. It's just like, how long someone has been training for is different to whether that person has been training or learning to train throughout that period. Yeah. Like, that first year of actual training you should be getting a pretty good idea of, okay, this is what solid technique is, and this is what true failure, as Jack spoke about, feels like. Here's how you navigate these things. Like, there's all kinds of skills that you need to acquire in order to generate the most productive outcomes from your training. So Jack's critique was well and truly valid. So before I go any further, could I get you to elaborate, Jack, a little bit on what you view true failure as, or how do you approach it in your own training?
Okay, I think how I approach it and how you should approach it are probably 2 different things. I think what I would say it is, or how I prescribe it to clients, would be until the point that you can't complete a rep with the same technique as you sort of started. So when technique is, so it's with completing a rep without the breakdown in form or technique. So you can't do that. However, it ends up that within my own training, if it becomes quite ballistic, which now and again it does, breakdown in technique, not to the extent that it's dangerous, but the last rep might not look like the first. But if you were to term it, what failure was, it would be the being unable to complete the rep without form breaking down, essentially.
Yep. Cool. So why, can I ask then, like, why do you have a different prescription methodology for yourself versus clients? Is it just like a safety thing? Like, you can be pretty sure that you'll be safe, whereas clients.
If I knew the client and if I saw them in person and I'd seen them training, I'd probably allow them to have that little leeway. Obviously within myself, I wouldn't do something that's completely ridiculous and unsafe, but I'm confident in that slight slip in. I'm not talking ridiculous technique here, but I'm allowing myself a slight slip in technique to maybe get the next few reps out. However, as of the past sort of 2 years, I have tightened up a lot because I've had a few injuries, not necessarily because of the way I was training, but injuries have made me realize that I need to tighten up on certain things. So I'd say in the past 2 years, form has definitely improved. When I scroll down my Instagram feed and see some of the videos I've used to put up. But so I'm a lot more in the camp now of keeping it within, so making sure, trying to make the first rep look as the last rep. Maybe a slight slip in form towards the end, maybe. But I'd say even within myself now, I try and keep it closer to keeping the reps all looking the same.
Yeah. And obviously, like, injuries are going to happen. Like that's yes, if you found some places where you can address form, that's important, and you should be aware of those things. But just like, I think we all just need to be aware, like, as a lifting community, like, injuries do happen, and especially when, like,
well, I think it's more important to note that you're just bringing in other things that contribute nothing towards the sort of goal that you're trying to achieve. So say, for example, if you're doing a chest fly, for example, a cable fly, and you just bring momentum and inertia into the last few, putting anything on the target muscle, really. So you'll be bringing additional muscles in, you'll be using momentum, and it doesn't and you're also taxing central nervous system without getting the reward of actually the hypertrophic response of that muscle. So it's a waste of time, really. You might feel like you're a badass when you do it, but it's not really bringing anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you raise a good point about, like, central fatigue or central nervous system fatigue, and something that is going to be a limiting factor in hypertrophy in some situations. And I think that does tie into, I guess, at least some of my reading of why RPE based methods might be slightly better. I do just have that, I guess, call it, for lack of a better word, a belief that it doesn't cause the amount of central fatigue that being further away from failure does. Yeah. While obviously factoring in, it probably comes with slightly less hypertrophy, but I think the fatigue trade-off is more beneficial.
I think, is it Mike Israetel terms it? The fatigue to benefit, sort of the fatigue to hypertrophy ratio kind of thing.
Stimulus fatigue ratio.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think one thing that, obviously this is very individually dependent, but I think individuals can recover from their central nervous systems can recover at sort of different rates. That's obvious. I think one's ability to sort of manage outside stresses and stuff like that will also massively contribute towards it as well. So if you've got if you're an individual that allows a lot of stresses outside of the gym influence you, that will have an effect on your central nervous system as well, obviously. So if you practice sort of if your sleep's good, stressors, and then even things like your recovery strategies and stuff like that, obviously they're all going to influence that sort of trade-off then. So it's hard for us to have an argument and place our opinions on an individual without sort of taking in all those factors as well.
No, you actually raise a fantastic point, and something that I did want to bring up as one of the benefits of failure training is that, fundamentally, if you haven't got your shit in order, you can't survive it. And I guess that's one of, someone might use that as an argument for, well, like, why would survive? Like, why would you push it on people? Because it kind of has that survivorship bias of, if the person gets their stuff in order, if training to failure means they can't go out and party, they have to get all their meals in, they've got to get 8+ hours of sleep a night, like, that is going to be extremely productive for this individual. But it's kind of that you walk that fine line of, will this person sink or swim? And it wouldn't be, I guess, I'm not suggesting that putting someone through like a high intensity type protocol is a good way to force them to get their lifestyle factors in order. I'm just saying, I think there is a common trait amongst successful bodybuilders or just lifters who employ the style of training that we're referring to. It's one of the reasons that makes them hold their recovery and lifestyle factors
because if they don't have their shit in order, essentially they won't be able to train like that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly right. And like,
so which leads on to sort of being in your camp then, that maybe someone that isn't all in regards bodybuilding or whatever your outlook is, someone that just wants to improve their physique but has a lot of stuff on the go. So say they've got family life or a busy job, and the training isn't everything to them, and I could see the benefit of using a reps in reserve sort of idea, because then it wouldn't place the recovery demands that they are not going to be able to recover from because of their lifestyle. So I can see where that would be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think as well, like when you are dealing with, I guess from just, if I'm to put my coaching hat on, and when you are dealing with people that, they might be a surgeon, they might be a CEO, they might be a bus driver, whatever, like, and they've had to focus, their entire day. Like sometimes they just haven't got that capacity to bring the heat of, what it takes, like for an all-out set. However, if we're having this conversation in regards to the theoretical, maximal, this is Jack, who wants to be the best bodybuilder that he can possibly be, do you then, you still agree, or you still obviously like think that RPE or leaving reps in reserve isn't optimal in that situation? If it's okay for, I guess, the person that, training isn't everything for them, but what about the person?
Obviously, I still am in agreement that the sort of training to failure would be the way forward. I think because if you are the person that's trying to be the best that they can be, you will manage all of those stresses. You will, like, obviously there's some that you can't, but everything that is out of my control, I completely sort of shut off really, and it doesn't influence me at all. I reduce every stressor in my life that I can. My recovery has always been really good. I think I'm quite blessed in that regard. So I think that's why I come from the camp that I do, because coming from personal experience, my recovery has always been good. So I think that does bias my opinion slightly. Whereas, if I was someone that didn't recover so well, then maybe I wouldn't be so for the training to failure camp. But I think within my own training, whenever I take something to failure, I am able to replicate that across. I've always been, even though I train to failure, I've always been a high volume person. Like my sessions last for a fair few hours, and I can sustain sort of training to failure across that. I don't know whether that's just because, like, from sort of a high mental capacity to do so, or just my love for training. I don't know. But whether other people would be able to sustain that, I don't know. But like, I think so. My opinion is shaped very much by my own personal experiences, as opposed to what I've seen other people are capable of. I don't know. You obviously have a different opinion because you may have worked with more clients. You may have seen it firsthand, but
yeah, like I don't think we need to bring that in at this stage. Like let's have a conversation about you. I think that's a good point of reference. So we agreed that, I guess, if training wasn't everything, then the RPE kind of method would work pretty well for you. It's like you get decent growth, but you're not looking for everything. But at this stage, you want to be the best bodybuilder that you can be. So you think that failure training is the way to go. Argue the point that if training is the most important thing to you and you want to do whatever you can to be the best bodybuilder possible,
would I look for other outlooks?
Yeah, like I guess I would say if you're going to make that case, I think you need to be open to the idea of having a better methodology. And obviously then we need to discuss whether it is actually the better methodology. But you said, because we were talking before about there's the difficulty of anchoring your reps to the correct RPE.
Yeah.
However, if you want to be the best bodybuilder possible, do you not think it would be beneficial for you to then learn to anchor your reps and ensure that you are gauging RPE correctly, and be open to the idea that there might be times where it's more beneficial for you to stay somewhat away from failure? And what do you think about that?
I think it's quite hard for me to answer it right now, because my training for the past sort of 2 years has been sort of plagued with, it's not an injury as such. It's like a muscle recruitment issue. It's hard for me to talk because at the moment whether I'm hitting true failure or not I'm unsure of, because I haven't been able to. Like, training's been a bit weird for the past 2 years.
Yeah,
if I can explain that. But even before that, I would always train to failure. I've been training to failure since I first started, so I think that's probably influenced me a lot. I actually don't think I've ever sort of intentionally left reps in reserve in a set. I don't think I ever have. But going back to the sort of adherence and enjoyment factor, I really wouldn't. I don't think I'd want to train half as much if I knew I had to leave those reps. But going back to your argument then, when you suggest that, well, is that me being the best bodybuilder that I can be? I think there are potentially a few things that I do that maybe I do because I want to do it, and it may not be the best in terms of, for example, I get up at early doors to do my cardio, and early doors, and it may it would be more beneficial to have a bit more sleep and then do it at some other point during the day. But it's certainly the RPE and reps and reserve is something that I've sort of opened up a little bit more to as of late. At the moment, I'm still not at the stage that I'd ever really consider it within my own training, but it's definitely something I'm looking into a little bit more. I think the main thing that's influencing it is the enjoyment thing. Like, even if it was to make me a better bodybuilder, I purely don't think that I would enjoy it. I think that's potentially the main thing that's holding me back. And then for a lot of the people who would listen to this, it would go back to me saying that even if I was to adopt it, it's because I know how to, or I know what failure is. And a lot of these people don't. So I don't know if you know of Jordan Peters over here in the UK, trained by JP. Yeah, so obviously at the moment he's sort of making it famous, and he's working with
Pascal, yeah. So obviously they're getting a lot of publicity about it, and obviously it will work for him because he knows what true failure is. Like if you watch his videos, and he's terming a set 2 RPE, no, 2 reps in reserve, 2 RIR, and his eyes are like coming out of his head, and he's got 2 left, and people are thinking there's no way he's got 2, and he's saying, yeah, that's 2 left. Whether people may doubt that it is, but I think if you watch he'll put a second video up where he's training 2 failure, and it looks the same, and he still gets those next 2 out. So I think, so to answer your question, yes, I am starting to look into potentially leaving reps in reserve. But then if I was to turn it back to you, within your programming for yourself or clients, even whilst utilizing a reps in reserve approach, would there all, per exercise, will there always be a set that is reaching failure? Or would there be some weeks, for example, where you would never touch failure at all? Yeah. For starters, I think that's a credit to you, that you're even considering shifting. I don't even say shifting methodology. It's just continually updating your own. The most beneficial thing. Obviously, well, I would like to think that we are just trying to work out what is the best approach. Some people get a little dogmatic, and they'd rather maintain their confirmation bias than have a better methodology for growing muscle. But to answer your question, most definitely there are weeks where nothing will be to failure. And we obviously need to factor in the consideration here that I am about half your size. So you could easily make the case that, I could be bigger if I trained to failure more often. But I do think it is more important. Would you like me to address the adherence bit first, or continue? Just let's come back to that. Sorry, we'll come back.
Yeah, you do both. Go through both, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the adherence one's actually quite quick. Yes, I think we all do things that are. We should all recognize we all do things that are logically inconsistent with something that we say we want. It's that cognitive dissonance. Yes, you do want to be the best bodybuilder that you can be, but that then needs to be factored in with, to be the best bodybuilder that you can be, you need to train, consistently for a long period of time. And if someone, even if they were to give you the best training program that would make you the best bodybuilder in 15 years' time, but you couldn't follow it for more than 15 weeks because you hated it and you felt like you were a pansy training with so many reps in reserve, then that's not actually going to result in you being the best bodybuilder possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is an ego thing as well. And like even though I do sort of acknowledge a lot of new approaches and stuff, I'm very bro as well, like bro bodybuilder-ish. Like another example would be I only take 1 day a week off at the moment, and if I had my own way, I probably wouldn't even take that off. If you said to me taking 2 or 3, like potentially in my head, I think 2 would certainly, it probably would benefit me, but I just can't see myself taking it off from an enjoyment factor. But it's something I'm edging towards potentially doing, because training has always been like, I have to be training, I have to be in the gym, I have to be going to failure. That's another example. So whereas now I am thinking a bit more you need to do these other things as well if you do want to be the best bodybuilder. I may not like doing it, but at the end of the day, I don't like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do cardio, but when I have to do it, I do it. So it's because for me, the training's the enjoyment side of it. So when you say, you need to take a rest day, that's sort of taking my enjoyment away. But then if it is to become a better bodybuilder, maybe I do need to think about that. And then that also links into the reps and reserve thing. If I need to adopt that, maybe I'll ease my way into it. But that's what I was getting at with when I say about easing into it. I think there would never be a stage where I would, like, say, for example, every exercise, if I was doing 3 sets, that at least that 1 set at the end would have to be to failure. I don't think I could ever perform an exercise if it was a true working exercise and not go to failure. So I think even if I was to adopt any sort of reps and reserve sort of program, that last set would have to be to failure. So I think you began to answer it before you went on to the sort of adherence side of it. Within your own programming, you mentioned that there are some weeks where you don't touch failure at all. Would that be perhaps like obviously deload weeks, and then also sort of weeks like the initial first week or 2 of a new program, like a priming sort of phase?
Yep. Yeah, you mentioned exactly the 2 weeks that immediately jumped to mind. Like deload week, without a doubt, I'm taking some time off, or like away from failure. And then the first few weeks of a training cycle, away from failure. And even towards the end of a training cycle, there's moving parts. Like just because it's the last week of my mesocycle doesn't mean, every set, every exercise, every body part, whatever is going to failure. Like I guess personally speaking, I run into recovery issues relatively quickly, even if I take, say half my body to failure. Like I'm by no means, as I said, a jacked individual. I've been training for somewhat a decent amount of time now though, and I've basically just had to run, what you might call like a specialization phase for, my biceps, my chest, and my side delts. Like those move last week of the couple of previous mesocycles I've had. But yeah, if I took everything to failure, that would completely tax me. Now that's all founded on top of the fact that I'm trying to accumulate a large amount of volume in all these things. So it's kind of like, as we're both talking about, if we started shifting our methodology, could we do it or could we do it? Could or couldn't we do it? But obviously if we were to make a change, it needs to be an incremental change with sort of like, one piece of the pie at a time. Like I certainly wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, you shouldn't go in and do your own, training next week, 5 reps in reserve for every single exercise. Like I think what we all need to be doing with our training is addressing the limiting factor for progress. Like whatever is the biggest biggest roadblock in the way for making progress, we need to address that. And maybe it's injuries, maybe it's recovery, maybe it's getting enough volume in, whatever. But yeah, okay. Did I answer your question? I guess there. Like there are certainly weeks where I don't go near failure.
So basically, the answer was just yes, you do, and there are. And then it's also interesting when you mentioned if you had a specialized block of when you were trying to bring up certain body parts, then you would shift more reps in reserve on the body parts that you're not having the focus on.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Which I guess lends credence to at least your argument that training to failure does have some advantageous benefits for hypertrophy. Like, because I made
you sort of edge towards my camp within that, but no, it's I think so. Going back to the sort of the original idea that say we're talking about the stimulating reps. So if we go right back to the start, because it just came into my head then, we're talking about the stimulating reps. If, say, as an individual, me versus you now, if every week I'm, say, getting 20 of those stimulating reps, and if you're pulling 2 reps in reserve across the week, you may only be getting, let's say 10 of those. Would you argue then that, obviously these are very sort of out there numbers, they're not exact. So would your argument be then that the 10 that I've accumulated, you've got to sort of, would there be, so this isn't really a point really, it's just saying that we'd have to weigh up whether the 10 more that I got than you has put me in a ditch that as opposed to yourself, leaving those reps has allowed you to accrue more volume. I think overall, it's just a very independent sort of answer. So it's going to come down to the individual. I think there's so many factors that influence that, like we said before, their recovery, whether they know what true failure is. And I think if I was to go into a set knowing I had to leave reps in reserve, I don't know whether I'd be able to get that close to failure anyway, because my mind wasn't. But then, like you said, it would take time to transition into it anyway. I think it probably would take quite a while for me to as well. But yeah, I think, to be honest, we've covered most. Obviously, we've covered the issues of both. Are there any situations where you would? I think you mentioned in the sort of last sort of week of your program. So is that like your overreaching sort of week where you would have a lot of sets taken to failure?
Yeah, like I'm not sure I go about it for the purpose of overreaching, but I guess I am trying to squeeze out the maximal capacity from my, the amount of recovery that I have.
And then would that week probably be followed by a deload, or?
Yeah, like unless I was willing to, even slide down some more training elsewhere, like unless I could free up recovery resources somewhere, like say I finished work for the year and I then had an additional whatever amount of time in my week. For the most part, I would be taking a deload the week after.
How do you, if you remember at all, how do you personally feel after those weeks? Have you ever done one of those weeks and felt all right? Or are you always pretty battered after them?
Yeah, I would say I do feel pretty run into the dirt for the most part.
Psychologically?
Yeah, like I've now, I guess, learned to cap it before I'm psychologically run into the dirt.
Okay.
Like I've tried to have, because I've definitely made those mistakes in the past where it's like you're doing 2-a-days, you're doing all kinds of stuff like that.
I think what sometimes scares me about myself, which is quite funny, like I can quite easily switch off from how I'm feeling. So say, for example, I did a 6-month contest prep and I trained, I'm not saying, oh, look at me. I'm not trying to boast about it, but I did a 6-month contest prep of training every day. I didn't have a single day off. Most of those days were 2-a-days because I was doing cardio. And, sometimes like when I know I've got to get something done, I just switch off from any sort of like emotions or any sort of like feelings of being run down and stuff like that. So I think, but then that links back to what we were talking about earlier. That could potentially be a downfall as well. Like yes, it can be a blessing when you have to get stuff done. But then, for example, in an off-season period where, or even pre-contest where you need to be managing your sort of fatigue, then maybe that might be a negative thing because then I'm not keeping an eye on sort of performance and stuff like that just because I've become so like removed from it. I just get on with it. So maybe that is, sometimes maybe I don't realize how run down I actually am. Because say, for example, I prepped for 2 years straight because I did 2 years competing back to back and I only had about 2.5 months off between those two periods. And it was only like half a year after those 2 years of prepping that I actually started to feel somewhat normal. And I thought, wow, I feel good. And that's how I should have been feeling all the time. But I just permanently felt run down for 2 years. So maybe a lot of the time I am just permanently run into the dirt and I don't really know it. So who knows, maybe if I dropped a few reps off, I might actually realize what feeling somewhat normal may feel like. I don't know. So I could be arguing my point when I'm not living a normal life. So potentially I could be in the wrong. So
no, I don't think I wouldn't say you're in the wrong. What you are doing obviously works. Like we need to be clear that this isn't the case of, go to failure or you won't grow any muscle, or leave reps in reserve, or you have the worst training. You will grow muscle whichever way you go about it, provided you put tension on high threshold motor units, or even not on high threshold motor units. You'll just grow a lot less muscle. But I think you raise, again, a fantastic point that people don't have points of reference, both for where failure is or how recovered they actually are. I think you have the fear of losing that point of reference of where failure is, so you continually push the failure. It's like I don't want to lose that. That's important, but it's also important to remember how you feel and how you're performing, and the recovery that the entirety of your body has is obviously very important. So to go back a step, I wouldn't actually start, if I was to change your training, with getting you to stop going to failure. I'd continue to get you to go to failure, but what I would do is, you mentioned before, like you do quite long sessions and you have the ability to back it up. I would probably be trimming stuff from the back end of those sessions before, and then really actually going, hey, Jack, you love going to failure. Let's fucking get after it for the first hour and a half. I'm like, after 90 minutes, you have to walk out of the gym. So I think that would be a cool way for you to just like see where you're at psychologically.
That's definitely something that I'm edging towards. Because what like creeps in, and it always has, is like, I'll have maybe 2 or 3 sets written down, and then that that second or third might feel so good, I end up doing another 1 or another 2 sets on top of that. That's something I've always done. I don't know why. It's sort of like overachiever mentality. But I think there's definitely something like shaving those off, no like more junk volume. I think that would be something that's very beneficial. And that would probably half my time in the gym, yeah. That would definitely aid the recovery side of it for sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, again, it's cool that you're thinking about these things, and I'm certainly, thinking about the things that you've been saying back as well. Like what was something I was going to say? Yeah, I think actually let's start maybe using some of the effective reps terminology, and because you mentioned that you go to failure and you have the capacity to back that up. But I guess I would then make the case that beyond a certain point, although you're hitting failure, it isn't failure due to it isn't muscular failure due to like peripheral fatigue. You're probably being limited by the recruitment of high threshold motor units, like central fatigue factors at that point.
So like your ability to actually recruit the muscle as opposed to the muscle actually giving out.
Yes, yeah. What do you think about that, and how do you think that might play into your training if you're doing sort of like multiple hour sessions?
That's definitely a good point, because then it brings back to my previous training where I like form wouldn't be amazing, and I'd probably just carry on shifting weight without it truly being on the target muscle. So I think that's definitely a point. I think I can see that with leaving maybe 1 or 2 in a cup, like the first 2 sets of a 3 set, for example, then I can see where you would still maintain the sort of that last set would be truly failure, and it would be failure from a muscular standpoint as opposed to the recruitment of it. I can definitely see that being a point. But then you're almost doing it in reverse then. So those 2 sets that you've done previously, obviously the muscle's not reaching failure, whereas it is on the last one, as opposed to if you did it the other way around and you hit failure on the first set, then on the other 2 they wouldn't be. So that might potentially balance out. Maybe doing it your way in the reps in reserve might be a bit more, well, it would be more efficient, and it wouldn't be taxing the muscle as the central nervous system as much. So yeah, that's a very good point. I think on paper in regards to like the sort of recruitment of muscle, but then it wouldn't have half the sort of fatigue and influence that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
It's not even like, obviously you've put across great points, but it's almost like I'm talking myself into it now. So you've influenced me. So, but
I'm just excited to see.
I've got pull today, so I might leave a few in the tank each set now. Let's see.
Nah, don't go soft on us. Go,
yeah. You'll see. You'll see. I'll slowly start to get even worse in my pictures on Instagram. Week by week, I'm shrinking, and everyone's like, "What's wrong with you?" I think one thing that we need to sort of address as well, I think, is we haven't touched upon it yet, but the use of like anabolics as well. So I think from an enhanced perspective, the reps in reserve has even more merit, I think, because there's a lot more like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy to be had.
Should I just interject for a second? Jack, should we just clarify, you're natural, still natural?
Yeah.
Can
you not see my traps? I'm natural, okay? So I think there's certainly more merit and worth to be had from an enhanced perspective with the reps in reserve. And I think naturally I'd still push more of the sort of high intensity approach. Obviously, you have swayed me towards being a bit more open to both sides, but I think as a natural athlete, you need to put more focus on the sort of closer to failure training, whereas I think, which is strange really, because obviously when you're enhanced, you could potentially recover to a greater degree, but it doesn't really have that much. It doesn't actually affect your TNS recovery, does it? So I think that's the sort of issue. Whereas leaving reps in reserve from an enhanced perspective, there's a lot more focus on the sort of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy as opposed to myofibrillar. So yeah, I think I just needed to add that in.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. Like, there is, whenever you change one factor, something else changes. It is an interesting question, I guess, or something to consider. So would it, if I was to rephrase it as a question, do you think the concern for natural athletes should be placed on generating a sufficient stimulus as opposed to worrying about like the fatigue? Like, do you think, the most important thing about growing natural muscle is getting hard enough training in and not being limited by or fearful of the fatigue that might come with that?
I think obviously what we've gone over previously about fatigue management and stuff like that, that's always going to be a factor you've got to, whether you're enhanced or not. I think that's always, I don't know, are you asking a lot? Can you hear that?
No, I can't.
It's fine on my end.
Oh, the kettle was boiling. I think you're always going to have to manage fatigue, whether you're enhanced or not. So with regards to like natural athletes, I think they should place more of an emphasis on that sort of higher intensity. But like we mentioned earlier, you're always going to have to sort of focus on your recovery and central nervous system and stuff like that anyway, like enhanced or not. But I think from a sort of, we're not talking like high level athletes here, like elite athletes. I think natural athletes are always going to have to train harder, to be honest. We're always playing catch up, so which takes into account like we have to factor in all those other, which obviously I haven't been doing as much as I've taken into consideration doing more now, but we need to be managing all the other factors quite closely as well. So yeah.
No, that's cool. And I think, as you said, like, as much as it's, or like you're now potentially viewing it as a curse that you shut yourself off to how your body's feeling, or like that haven't prioritized or thought about maybe other things, like fundamentally you don't get to where you are and being, such a successful bodybuilder and having grown as much muscle as you have if you don't have that, that bloodthirsty desire to just train. If you gave me the option of, having someone that was very experienced with RPE and, but were unwilling to train balls to the wall, or you gave me someone that's, ready to slit their throat just to grow, another 500 grams of muscle, I'd take that person any day of the week and then just try to learn to teach them. It's like, hey, if you want to be as good as you say you want to be, maybe holding back at certain periods is a good idea.
Yeah.
I think I've, mostly explained my thoughts. Like, James, did you have any other questions or?
So this has been a fascinating discussion. I have been mainly a fly on the wall, sort of listening.
I can tell. You've kept quiet.
Maybe that's what you could hear. It was James just buzzing in the corner.
No, I hope sort of we've got some good points across.
Yeah,
You know,
no, 100%.
I know I certainly I've been very impressed, and sort of Lyndon has swayed me. So
Yeah. I mean,
You're too kind.
there's still stuff we could touch on. However, I want to be mindful of time, and I mean, it's already been an intense. My brain is full right now, but I think, how are we for time? If we have time, I would like to touch on sort of different methods of progression. Mainly sort of the progression of, if given the choice, do we increase intensity or do we increase volume? And obviously that's not a black and white question. Obviously there's more nuance to that, but I would like to sort of touch on volume a bit more, because I think as intensity rises, obviously we only say we have a bucket of recovery. As intensity rises, each unit of volume will take up a larger amount of the bucket. Where in some, for instance, this is something that I think has been called by JPS. Let me know if I've got any of this wrong, Lyndon. One of the things you guys put out, I think it was an infographic sort of touching on, okay, big compounds potentially go further away from failure, higher rep isolations potentially go closer to failure across the board. Anything along those sort of lines, I guess.
Yeah, I think you got that pretty much right. Like as we discussed, like there is a stimulus to fatigue ratio of everything that we do. When you look at isolations, not that you can really, isolate any muscle, but it's like less joints involved, or less centrally taxing. I think you have a greater ability to take them closer to failure and really, really nail those in. Whereas something like your squats and your deadlifts, I personally wouldn't recommend going as close to failure. I think technique is a greater concern, like movement patterns, and you're more likely to be limited by central factors like cardiovascular fitness. So I think if that's the question you're asking. But when it comes to the load versus volume progression, I do think this is an excellent topic to discuss. And again, something that I made notes of is because all like the conversation we were having about reps in reserve and which way to go, there's so many other issues that it comes tangled with it. It's like, yeah, the volume guys typically, the reps in reserve guys typically promote volume progressions, whereas the high intensity training guys typically promote load progressions. And then there's and then it just becomes like a high volume versus low volume discussion, all these kinds of things. But I think Jack and I both are in agreement here. I think this is what we established at the start, that what we need to do is we need to activate high threshold motor units. Now, you can activate high threshold motor units via different methods. You can add load, and that basically makes you are recruiting a greater amount of higher threshold motor units each rep, and that's a way to get to the high threshold motor units. Maybe we start.
I think if there was an increased load, you'd probably recruit them quicker, wouldn't you?
Yes. Sorry, you'd recruit them quicker. That's would have been the easy way to go about it. Or you can just do more volume, and you basically need to go through the process of how, a high rep set gets to high threshold motor units. You fatigue out the lower threshold motor units, and it forces recruitment of the higher threshold ones for the work to continue. So, to me, it really is. I can't boil it down personally to a theoretical question of which you should do, because I think you are just always going to be limited by what is practically viable.
And what you can recover from. Actually.
Yeah, totally. It's like,
I think so. So like what you're saying, you can achieve what we want. So recruiting those higher threshold motor units by both, essentially. So It's just how much you can increase those, so volume or load, without it being detrimental to recovery and subsequent sessions, basically.
Did that get what you were looking for, James? Or
yeah. So
both methods are a viable way of sort of increasing the hypertrophic response. However, juggling and managing how much you increase those is the sort of key to the puzzle.
Yeah, because I guess the thing that I've found interesting as the more I've sort of learned, is sort of how there is different progression methods. Obviously, they all work. And obviously, it's very hard to answer the question, and I don't think we can ever really answer it as of which is the best, because it's never really going to be that black and white, and it's so context dependent. That answers it for the most part. It's sort of just like, say, given we have that bucket of recovery, I feel as though the more sort of going to failure crowd, or the going to failure or versus the RIR crowd, who will sort of get more behind volume, it's sort of where we're juggling adding each one, then it's kind of I feel as though once we are, it's a balance, right? It's like you could add, you could be
all I would say is that volume isn't an infinite, like you won't be able to carry on increasing volume forever, because you've only got so long in the gym. Then again, I'm not saying that you will always be able to increase your load, because then you're going to come into stuff like injuries and stuff like that. So obviously, it's just sort of exploring both outlets, really.
Yeah, I will completely agree. I think it is an interesting question to think about theoretically, but to me, it's a false dichotomy. Like it.
Which means
boiling something down to two choices, that there are more choices to choose between than just the two, and I think just always the discussions that go on in Facebook groups, in websites, whatever, cool. It's interesting to think about what would you add, load or volume, but basically you just take whichever progression is there at the time, or you should, I think, it's like what all of them generate hypertrophy. Yeah, I can't move from, the 12.5 kilos lateral raises to the 15s. You can't make a load progression for lateral raises, whatever. So it's like, you might have to add some reps. Then if you can't do that, do some double progression, add some sets, do some whatever. Like by the time you used to do 3x8, by the time you've gone from 3x8 to 4x12, you probably can make the jump to the 15s or whatever. Like it's just keep pushing pretty close to failure and making, practical progressions in your weights, reps, and sets. That means you're not, doing squats for sets of 20. Your squats probably want to be doing somewhere between 3 and 8 to 10. If you're doing more than 10 reps of squats, I'd be adding some load. But if you're doing, trying to do heavy dumbbell flies, I'd be pulling the load back and adding some volume or something like that. So it's like, I think we can't answer this directly because there's individual differences, there's context, there's recovery, there's exercise biases as well. But you are on the right track, James, I think, when you are thinking about, given this limited amount of resources, which should I direct my focus towards? And that's totally cool, but it might only be a 55-45 bias towards adding sets and reps. Like there's still going to be, fuck adding volume for your deadlifts. Like just put some weight on there. Like, you don't want to have to do one more rep of those unless you're jacked than what you have to. So
yes. So, I think this has been a fascinating discussion to listen to. It's been really cool for me because it's kind of like, okay, I follow you both quite intensely. I know, I would say, I followed Jack for 2 years now or some shit, fucking ages. And as he said before, it's like I've seen him do the same thing day in, day out. It fucking baffles me. Like it makes me look like a fucking amateur. Like I couldn't even. It makes me look like a weekend warrior. It's fucked.
You are, James.
I honestly am. Honestly, relative weekend warrior. Like it's fucked.
I fucking love your Instagram, James. Like I hope you never change.
Thanks, Lyndon. I'm gonna take that as a compliment and just run with that. And then, yeah. So I think we can end it off there. So Jack, have I lost you guys? So Jack, where can people find you?
No, I'm happy to. What was that,
Can you put yourself back on screen, because
yeah.
Jack and I can't see you, and we're just like there's facial cues that we're missing.
Yeah. So whereabouts can people find you guys? Jack, where can people find you online?
So I'm mostly active on Instagram. With my username is just my name, Jack Thorburn. That's mostly where I'm active. I don't really use Facebook an awful lot, so just be on Instagram at Jack Thorburn.
Yeah. Do you do any online coaching? Can anyone reach out for anything?
I do. My email is within my bio on Instagram, but it's just my name, so Jack Thorburn at hotmail.co.uk. So if there was any inquiries, just email through that or via Instagram as well.
Oh, and then Lyndon, where can people find yourself?
People can find me on eHarmony for the most part. I've got a dual photo with James Walshamy as my
It's very cute.
People can. I would just say, if you want to find my actually useful work in this regard, it's probably just the JPS blog or JPS education. If you're interested in following me personally, you can find me at hot_and_dondress.
Are you ever going to change that shit?
I'm not
Is
sure.
that a legit email?
No, that's his fucking Instagram.
That's my Instagram. I don't take social media too seriously, as we've discussed before, James.
Yes.
So I'm not going to be posting cool, back double biceps, most muscular photos like Jack. I'll just be posting dumb photos of me at music festivals or
explaining.
Maybe if you went a bit closer to failure, you might be. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. I fail in so many.
I joke.
I fail in so many aspects of life. I'm not sure I can bring failure into the gym, because I'll
It's another one.
Wow.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Jack. That was an awesome discussion.
Honestly, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
If you guys did enjoy this episode, go and follow those guys on Instagram. The links will be in the show notes, or you can find them at Jack_Thorburn or at JPS Health and Fitness or JPS Education. Or for Lyndon, you can find him at Hot and Dongdress on Instagram. And if you'd like to find me or anything like that, not that I talked very much in this episode, at the Hypertrophy Hub. And then also you can find me at James_Walsham. So I know my names are much more appropriate than Lyndon's. I'm actually starting a petition to get Lyndon to change his name on Instagram. If you'd be interested in signing that, all you have to do is just send some mail to JPS Health and Fitness, just saying, Lyndon, please change your Instagram handle. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. If you really did like it, leave a review. If you did not like it so much, you can send some hate mail to, I have a anonymous hate mail thing in my Instagram bio. I'm absolutely not joking. Seriously. So it's just linked as anonymous feedback in my Instagram bio. So if you would like to give me hate mail, go and send it there. If you liked the show, you can send it there too. That wouldn't be too bad. Or if you want to be really nice, you could rate me 5 stars on iTunes. That would be absolutely lovely.